Back in the late 70s, something terrifying happened in Southern California. It all started with an ordinary-looking van, nothing fancy, just cruising through neighborhoods. But inside were two men, Lawrence Bittaker and Roy Norris, and they weren't just out for a drive. Between June and October of 1979, they abducted five teenage girls. Their crimes were brutal, not with guns or knives, but with tools you'd find in any garage. Pliers, ice picks, screwdrivers. They used them to torture and kill. That's how they got their nickname, the Toolbox Killers. And the van they used? They called it Murder Mac. What makes this case even darker is how calculated and cold it was. It's one of the most disturbing true crime stories to come out of California, and it still sends chills down people's spines today. Who was Lawrence Bittaker? Lawrence Bittaker was born in Pittsburgh in 1940, but his life started off rocky. His birth parents didn't plan to have children, so he was placed in an orphanage as a baby and later adopted. His adoptive father worked in aviation, so the family moved around a lot during his childhood. By the time he was 12, Bittaker had already started getting in trouble, mostly for shoplifting and petty theft. He later claimed he acted out because he felt unloved at home. Despite having a high IQ of 138, he struggled in school, found it boring, and dropped out in 1957. After that, things spiraled. He was arrested multiple times for stealing cars, hit and runs, and trying to escape police. He ended up in juvenile detention until he turned 18. When he got out, he found out his adoptive parents had cut ties and moved away. He never saw them again. Who was Roy Norris? Roy Norris was born in 1948 in Greeley, Colorado. His parents got married mainly to avoid the social stigma of having a child out of wedlock. Growing up, things were unstable. His mom struggled with drug addiction, and his dad worked at a scrapyard. Roy bounced between living with his parents and foster families, many of which he later described as neglectful. He claimed he was often mistreated and even sexually abused in one foster home. These early experiences, he said, had a lasting impact on him, especially shaping some of his later attitudes and behavior. At 16, things took a dark turn. After making inappropriate comments to a female relative, Roy got into trouble at home, stole his dad's car, and tried to take his own life. After being found and brought back, his parents told him and his sister they had never been wanted and planned to divorce once the kids were grown. A year later, Norris dropped out of school and joined the U.S. Navy. He served in Vietnam but didn't see combat and was honorably discharged after his service. Lawrence Bittaker's early crimes. After getting out of juvenile detention, Bittaker wasted no time getting back into trouble. Just days after his release, he was arrested for driving a stolen car across state lines and sent to prison in Oklahoma. Once he got out in 1960, he didn't stay out long. Within months, he was caught robbing someone in Los Angeles and sentenced to 15 years. During this time, psychiatrists described him as manipulative and full of hidden anger. He was paroled in 1963, but the cycle continued. He kept violating parole, committing new crimes like theft and burglary, and bouncing in and out of prison. Psych evaluations labeled him a borderline psychopath who struggled to take responsibility for his actions. At one point, he was even put on antipsychotic meds. In 1974, things escalated. After being accused of shoplifting a steak, Bittaker stabbed a store employee in the chest, nearly killing him. The victim survived, and Bittaker was convicted of assault with a deadly weapon and sent to prison once again. Roy Norris's criminal history. Roy Norris's first known sex-related arrest happened in 1969 when he was charged with rape and attempted rape. A few months later, he tried to break into a woman's home after she refused to let him in, but police arrived before anything happened. Not long after, military doctors diagnosed him with a personality disorder, and he was discharged from the Navy due to mental health issues. In 1970, things escalated. While out on bail, Norris viciously attacked a female student he'd been stalking at San Diego State University. He was arrested again and sent to a state hospital where he was labeled a mentally disordered sex offender. Doctors eventually deemed him no longer a danger, and in 1975, he was released on probation. But just 3 months later, Norris assaulted and raped a woman in Redondo Beach after luring her with a ride offer. She later spotted his motorcycle and helped police track him down. He was convicted of that rape and sent to California Men's Colony, where he would later meet Lawrence Bittaker. How Bittaker and Norris met. Bittaker and Norris first met in 1977 while serving time at California Men's Colony in San Luis Obispo. At first, they were just casual acquaintances. Norris was known around the prison for hanging out with biker gang members and dealing in contraband, and Bittaker saw him as a street-smart guy. Their bond grew when Norris showed Bittaker how to make jewelry. According to Norris, Bittaker even stepped in to protect him from other inmates a couple of times, and the two eventually became close. As they spent more time together, their conversations took a dark turn. They discovered they both had disturbing fantasies involving young women. Norris admitted he was most aroused by seeing girls terrified, and Bittaker said that if he ever committed rape, he'd kill the victim to avoid leaving a witness. Alone, they started plotting future crimes, including a twisted plan to kidnap and kill one girl for every year between ages 13 and 19. Before leaving prison, they agreed to reconnect on the outside and put their horrific ideas into action. Life after prison, the deadly reunion. Bittaker was released from prison in October 1978 and returned to Los Angeles. He landed a well-paying job as a machinist, earning around $1,000 a week. Though he described himself as a loner, he got along well with neighbors and was known for being generous, even donating to charity and giving food and wine to people experiencing homelessness. He also became popular among local teenagers, often keeping beer and marijuana at his place to make it a social hangout. Just 3 months later, in January 1979, Norris was also released and moved in with his mother in Redondo Beach. He quickly found a job as an electrician, and not long after received a letter from Bittaker. The two reunited in late February at a hotel where they reignited the disturbing plan they'd talked about in prison, targeting young girls. To carry out their plan, Bittaker bought a silver 1977 GMC Vandura van with help from Norris. It had no side windows and a large sliding door, features they believed would help them pull up to unsuspecting victims more easily. They gave the van a chilling nickname, Murder Mac. Planning the crimes between February and June 1979, Bittaker and Norris picked up more than 20 female hitchhikers, but not to harm them, at least not at first. These early encounters were practice runs to test out ways to convince girls to get into their van willingly and to scout out remote areas without raising suspicion. By late April, they had found a secluded spot in the San Gabriel Mountains. Bittaker forced open a locked gate on an isolated fire road and replaced the lock with one of his own, securing a hidden location where they could carry out their disturbing plans. The tragic case of Lucinda Schaefer. On June 24, 1979, 16-year-old Lucinda Lynn Schaefer was walking home after attending a church event in Redondo Beach when she became the first known victim of Bittaker and Norris. That day, the two men had been driving around in their van, which they had prepared in advance with a hidden bed and supplies. In the evening, they spotted Lucinda walking alone and attempted to offer her a ride. When she declined, they waited ahead on the road. Norris got out, approached her, and forcibly pulled her into the van. They drove to a secluded mountain area they'd previously scouted. Lucinda stayed calm and composed throughout the ordeal, even asking for time to pray when she realized she might not be released. Tragically, her request was denied. After taking her life, Bittaker and Norris disposed of her remains in a remote canyon, believing animals would destroy any trace of evidence. Andrea Joy Hall. Just 2 weeks after their first crime, on July 8, 1979, Bittaker and Norris came across 18-year-old Andrea Joy Hall hitchhiking along the Pacific Coast Highway. Although another driver picked her up first, they followed until she was dropped off in Redondo Beach. There they offered her a second ride. To make it seem like Bittaker was alone, Norris hid in the back of the van. Once Andrea was inside, she was unexpectedly attacked and restrained. The pair then drove her to a remote area in the San Gabriel Mountains. Over the next few hours, Andrea was moved between secluded spots. She endured horrific treatment and was forced to pose for photos. According to later accounts, she showed incredible courage, even pleading for her life. Tragically, Bittaker took her life in a brutal manner and disposed of her body in the mountains. Jackie Gilliam and Jacqueline Lamp. On September 3, 1979, 15-year-old Jackie Gilliam, and 13-year-old Jacqueline Lamp were waiting at a bus stop in Hermosa Beach after a day of hitchhiking when they were approached by Bittaker and Norris, who offered them a ride. The girls accepted and were soon offered marijuana. Not long after, they realized the van was headed away from the coast toward the mountains, and they became alarmed. When they tried to escape, the men responded with violence, ultimately subduing both girls and driving them deep into the San Gabriel Mountains. There, Jackie and Jacqueline were held captive in the van for nearly 2 days. During this time, they were repeatedly abused and terrorized, with one of the men even taking disturbing photographs and making audio recordings. Despite one of the girls trying to remain calm and cooperative, the pair showed no mercy. Both Jackie and Jacqueline were brutally killed and their bodies discarded in the wilderness. Shirley Lynette Ledford. On Halloween night in 1979, 16-year-old Shirley Ledford was hitchhiking home from a party in the Sunland Tujunga area of Los Angeles. It's believed she accepted a ride from Bittaker and Norris because she recognized Bittaker from her part-time job at a local McDonald's. After she entered the van, the two men restrained her and drove to a secluded area. Over the course of several hours, she was subjected to horrific abuse, some of which was recorded on tape, a fact that would later become central to the investigation and deeply disturb even seasoned investigators. Eventually, Shirley was killed, and her body was left on a residential lawn in Sunland, likely as an attempt to draw attention. Her body was discovered the next morning by a jogger. The medical examiner confirmed she had suffered severe trauma. This tragic case marked the end of the pair's crime spree and played a major role in their eventual capture and prosecution. Investigation. In November 1979, Roy Norris confided in an old prison acquaintance, Joseph Jackson, revealing shocking details about his involvement, alongside Lawrence Bittaker, in multiple assaults and murders, including that of Shirley Ledford, whose body had already been discovered. Troubled by the confession, Jackson sought legal advice and was encouraged to contact the police. He did so, and the case was handed over to Hermosa Beach detective Paul Bynum. Bynum found that Norris's admissions aligned with several unsolved cases involving missing young women. One incident stood out. Norris had mentioned a survivor who had been attacked with mace and raped, then released. That matched the report of Robin Robeck, who had described a nearly identical experience back in September. When shown mugshots, Robeck immediately identified Bittaker and Norris as her attackers. This confirmation played a key role in building the case against the two men and advancing the investigation. Arrest after linking Bittaker and Norris to the assault on survivor Robin Robeck, police began watching Norris closely. Within days, they arrested him for a parole violation involving drug activity. That same day, November 20th, 1979, Bittaker was also arrested at his motel for Robeck's rape. Although Robeck couldn't identify them in a lineup, both men were held on drug and parole charges. A search of Bittaker's van and apartment uncovered disturbing evidence: personal items belonging to missing girls, tools likely used in the crimes, and a tape recording capturing a woman in clear distress. The voice was identified as Shirley Ledford, and the men heard on the tape were confirmed to be Bittaker and Norris. Police also found hundreds of Polaroid photos of young women, most taken without their knowledge, at various beaches and high schools. A bracelet taken from Ledford was found in Norris's apartment, further tying them to the crimes. Confession on November 30th, 1979, Roy Norris began to show signs of stress as he attended a preliminary hearing for the September 30th rape case. During questioning by investigators, he initially denied involvement in any murders. But when presented with mounting evidence, he began to confess, placing most of the blame on Bittaker. Norris calmly described how the two of them would cruise around places like the Pacific Coast Highway, approaching young women with offers of rides, drugs, or photo opportunities. While most declined, a few accepted and were tragically abducted. Once inside the van, victims were restrained, driven to remote mountain areas, assaulted, and ultimately killed, often by strangulation, though some suffered other brutal acts. Norris revealed disturbing details about their crimes, including the planned use of acid and how each victim endured more cruelty than the last. He claimed their final victim, Shirley Ledford, had begged for death to end her pain. Many of Norris's details were confirmed by evidence or facts only the killers would know. He also pointed out that some of the photos they had taken suggested there might be at least one other unidentified victim. In a public statement in early 1980, officials confirmed 5 murder charges and described the crimes as sadistic and barbaric. Of the many photos found in the suspects' homes, 60 women were located and unharmed, but 19 others remained missing, raising fears there could be even more victims. Search of the San Gabriel Mountains. After confessing, Norris agreed to help investigators search the San Gabriel Mountains, where he and Bittaker had left the bodies of their victims. He led detectives to the general areas, but despite thorough searches, the remains of Schaefer and Hall were never found. However, on February 9, 1980, the remains of Lamp and Gilliam were discovered in a canyon near a dry riverbed. Their remains were scattered, and the evidence matched the violent details Norris had described, including an ice pick still lodged in one of the victims' skulls. Later that month, both men were officially charged with the murders of the 5 young women. While Bittaker was denied bail, Norris's was set at $10,000. Not long after Norris agreed to a plea deal, he would testify against Bittaker in exchange for avoiding the death penalty. Summary of the case: Lawrence Bittaker and Roy Norris. In 1980, Roy Norris pleaded guilty to multiple charges, including 5 murders, rape, and robbery. In exchange for his cooperation and testimony against his accomplice, Lawrence Bittaker, prosecutors agreed not to seek the death penalty or life without parole for Norris. He was sentenced to 45 years to life and became eligible for parole in 2010. However, psychological evaluations described him as a dangerous, remorseless sociopath, and he was never released. Lawrence Bittaker, on the other hand, faced trial in 1981. His former partner Norris testified in detail about the abductions, abuse, and murders they committed together, providing graphic accounts of the crimes. One of the most disturbing pieces of evidence was an audio recording of the final victim's torture. Played in court to a visibly shaken audience, Bittaker, however, showed no emotion and even smiled during the playback. Despite Bittaker's defense trying to shift the blame onto Norris, the jury found him guilty on all charges. He was sentenced to death, with an additional 199 years added in case the death sentence was overturned. His appeals were denied, and although his execution was delayed several times, Bittaker died of natural causes in 2019 while still on death row. Roy Norris died the following year in prison. He had also tried to shift more blame onto Bittaker in later years, claiming fear and manipulation drove his actions. However, experts remained convinced he was equally culpable, with a long history of violence against women even before teaming up with Bittaker. This case left a lasting impact. Prosecutor Stephen Kay described it as the most disturbing of his career, and lead investigator Paul Bynum was so haunted by the crimes that he tragically took his own life years later. The FBI still uses the infamous audio tape in training to expose agents to the brutal realities of torture and murder.